I worked nights at a high school that had an indoor swimming pool. Most schools don't even have those anymore, but this one was built in the 1960s, and the pool was one of its biggest features. During the day, it was loud, full of students splashing, yelling, lifeguards blowing whistles. But at night, when the building was empty, it became one of the creepiest places I've ever been. The pool room was massive, with bleachers on one side, long, narrow hallways leading to the locker rooms, and giant windows that looked out onto the football field. Everything echoed in there. If you dropped a mop, the sound bounced around like a gunshot. Even your footsteps sounded wrong, stretched out, like they were following you. Every janitor I worked with hated cleaning the pool after dark. Some even refused to do it alone. But on overnight shifts, we didn't have a choice. You either cleaned it or got written up. At first, I thought people were just exaggerating. It's just water and tile, right? But the more nights I spent in that room, the more uneasy I started to feel. You'd walk in and the smell of chlorine would hit you, thick and sharp in the air. The water always looked too dark, even with the overhead lights on, like something could be lurking just beneath the surface. And sometimes, the water would ripple on its own. Not from the filter system, not from the air vents, just one long ripple, as if someone had brushed their hand across the top. One night, around 2 a.m., I had to sweep the pool deck. I rolled my cart in, already on edge. The door creaked loud when I opened it, and the echo of it slamming shut behind me made me flinch. I started sweeping near the bleachers, the sound of the broom scraping against the tiles echoing way too loud. I kept glancing at the water, half expecting to see something moving under the surface. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints. At first I thought maybe I had tracked something in myself, but I stopped and looked. These weren't from my boots. They were bare feet. Human feet. Small, like a teenager's. They started at the edge of the pool, dripping wet, and led across the deck, straight toward the locker rooms. I froze. The school had been locked up for hours. Every door, every exit was sealed. No one was supposed to be inside. My first thought was a kid had somehow hidden after practice, maybe trying to pull a prank. My heart was pounding, but I told myself I had to check. So I followed the trail with my flashlight. Each footprint glistened under the beam, toes pressed into the tile like whoever it was had just climbed out of the pool minutes earlier. But the farther I followed them, the more wrong it felt. The footprints didn't fade. Normally water dries or smudges, but these prints stayed sharp and wet like they'd been made seconds ago. They led straight to the hallway, and then stopped. Just stopped. Right in the middle of the floor. No puddle, no smudge, nothing. Like whoever it was had vanished into thin air. My stomach turned cold. I stood there with my flashlight shaking in my hand, waiting, listening. I wanted to call out, "Hello, who's here?" But my throat was dry. Something in me didn't want to hear an answer. Finally, I turned back toward the pool and my blood ran cold. The water was moving, not a little ripple. It was sloshing, like someone had just dived in. The surface rolled and rocked against the sides of the pool, but no one was there. I scanned the water, expecting to see a head pop up, or bubbles or anything, but the pool was empty, just black water reflecting the ceiling lights. I felt my knees weaken. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the pool as the water slowly stilled itself. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I finally forced myself to back away, step by step. My boots squeaked on the wet tile. I didn't even finish sweeping. I locked the pool doors behind me and left my cart sitting outside in the hallway. I skipped that area for the rest of the week. But it didn't stop there. A few nights later, I was walking past the pool doors with my mop bucket when I heard it. Splashing. Loud like someone's swimming laps. I stopped dead. The hairs on my neck stood up. My first thought was that maybe the coach had come in late, but the doors were locked, and I hadn't seen anyone else enter the building all night. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the metal door. The splashing was rhythmic, steady, like arms cutting through the water. Then suddenly, it stopped. Dead silent. And then, 3 slow knocks from the inside of the pool door. I stumbled back so fast I almost slipped on the wet floor. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I left the mop where it was and walked away as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. After that, I refused to go near the pool alone. If it was on the list, I waited until another custodian came in and we did it together. And even then, none of us liked turning our backs to the water. You'd always get the feeling that if you looked away for too long, someone, or something, would be standing on the edge. Years later, after I quit, one of my old coworkers told me a story. Back in the 1970s, before I even worked there, a student had drowned in that very pool during swim practice. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered he'd been held under. Either way, people claimed that late at night, you could still see wet footprints leading from the pool to the locker rooms, only for them to vanish halfway down the hall. I don't know if what I saw was connected to that, but I know what I felt. The heavy silence, the water moving when no one was there, and those wet footprints leading nowhere. To this day, I can't stand being near an indoor pool at night. Every time I smell chlorine, I'm back in that room, staring at the black water, waiting for something to surface. The middle school where I worked had a basement that most people avoided. Down there was the boiler room, and it was by far the worst part of the entire building. If you've never been in a school boiler room at night, let me paint the picture. It's not like a normal basement. The ceiling is low, the walls are bare concrete, and giant metal pipes run in every direction like veins in a body. The air is thick, hot, and smells of rust and old water. The boilers themselves are massive steel tanks that thrum and rattle constantly, filling the whole place with a low growl you can feel in your chest. When I was first hired, one of the older custodians told me, "Don't spend more time in the boiler room than you have to." I laughed, thinking he meant it was just uncomfortable. But after a few months on night shifts, I realized exactly what he meant. The place didn't just feel hot and cramped. It felt wrong. The thing about those pipes is they never stop making noise. They hiss, rattle, knock. Sometimes they groan like someone dragging a heavy chain through the walls. And if you sit still and listen long enough, you'll swear the sound is forming words, like a whisper just out of reach. A voice too low to understand, but close enough to make your skin crawl. Most nights, I avoided the basement unless it was absolutely necessary. But one night, I got a work order saying there was a leak near the boiler. I groaned the second I saw it. The thought of going down there alone at 2 a.m. made my stomach twist, but I didn't want to get written up for ignoring it. I grabbed my flashlight, my tool bag, and headed for the basement stairs. The stairwell was steep and narrow, the kind where your footsteps echo all the way down. By the time I reached the bottom, I was already sweating, and not just from the heat. I pushed open the heavy metal door, and that familiar wall of air hit me, hot, thick, metallic. The smell of rust was so strong it made the back of my throat sting. The boiler roared in the corner like a living thing, pipes clattering and steam hissing from the valves. I crouched down with my flashlight and started checking the pipes along the wall. Sure enough, one of the old joints was dripping, water running down onto the concrete floor in a steady rhythm. I leaned closer, trying to tighten the connection. That's when I heard it. Bootsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots walking across the floor behind me. My blood ran cold. I froze, still crouched near the pipe, every muscle in my body locking up. At first I thought maybe it was one of the other custodians, but I was scheduled to be working alone that night. Slowly, I turned my head and swung my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the steam and shadows, sweeping across the floor, the walls, the corners. No one was there. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself, and went back to the leak. But then the boots came again. Step, step, step. This time the sound wasn't random. It was pacing, back and forth, like someone walking in a line, stopping, turning, and walking again. I whipped the flashlight around faster this time, checking every inch. My own breathing was so loud I could barely hear. The sound of boots kept going, circling me, but the beam showed nothing. Just pipes, steam, and shadows. My chest tightened. I knew I wasn't imagining it. The floor vibrated faintly with each step. Something was there. I backed up slowly, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. My boots echoed against the concrete as I moved toward the stairs. And then, suddenly, the sound stopped, dead silent, except for the low hum of the boiler. The silence was somehow worse than the footsteps. I stood there at the bottom of the stairs, my back pressed against the cool metal railing, ears straining. That's when it happened. A whisper. Not from far away, not from the pipes. Right next to me. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. Don't come back. The words were so close, I felt the breath on my ear. My whole body jolted like I'd been shocked. My flashlight shook in my hand as I spun around, pointing the beam in every direction. No one was there. The floor was empty. The doorway was empty, but I knew what I'd heard. I didn't even bother grabbing my tools. I bolted up the stairs 2 steps at a time, slammed the door shut behind me, and locked it. My heart was racing so hard I could barely breathe. I leaned against the wall at the top of the stairwell, sweating, shaking, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The next day, I told one of the older custodians what happened. He just gave me a long look and said, "That's why I told you not to go down there." Then he told me something I wish I hadn't asked about. Years earlier, before I started working there, one of the maintenance guys had died in that boiler room, collapsed from heat stroke during the summer. They didn't find him until the next morning. Some of the staff joked that he never left, that you could still hear his boots walking the floor if you went down there alone. I had laughed it off at the time, but after that night, I didn't laugh anymore. From then on, I refused to enter the boiler room by myself. If anything went wrong down there, I waited until another custodian was on shift, and we went together. And even then, the whole time I'd be sweating, not just from the heat, but from the fear that at any moment I'd hear those boots again. To this day, whenever I hear the sound of heavy work boots on concrete, it sends a shiver down my spine, because I can still hear that whisper in my head. Low, steady, and right at my ear. Don't come back. The high school where I worked had an unused wing. Most people didn't even know it existed. It was a stretch of classrooms down a long hallway, sealed off after budget cuts years before I got there. Teachers and students joked about it being haunted, but to me it didn't feel like a joke. The wing was in bad shape. The paint was peeling in long strips. Water stains spread like shadows across the ceiling, and most of the windows had been boarded up from the inside. The air smelled old, like dust and mildew. Desks were stacked against the walls, bookshelves half collapsed, papers yellowed and curling in the corners. It was like the school had just given up on it and locked the doors, leaving everything to rot. Still, once a month, we had to sweep through for fire safety checks. That meant unlocking the double doors, walking the halls, and making sure no one had broken in. I always dreaded those nights. The rest of the school could be creepy at 2 in the morning, sure, but that wing was different. It felt dead, empty in a way that pressed on your chest, like the building itself didn't want you there. One night I was assigned the inspection alone. I remember standing at the double doors with my flashlight, my keyring jingling in my hand, and feeling this heaviness settle over me. I pushed the key in, turned the lock, and the doors creaked open with a long groan. Immediately, a blast of cold air hit me, and I don't mean just a draft. The rest of the school was stuffy and warm, but this air was sharp, biting, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. I stopped short, rubbing my arms, and for a second I considered turning back. But orders were orders. I stepped inside. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lined with closed classroom doors. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping across chipped lockers and broken ceiling tiles. Each step echoed too loud, bouncing back at me in a way that made me feel like someone else was walking behind me. About halfway down the hall, I froze. One of the classroom doors, just ahead of me, moved, slowly. It swung shut with a dull click. My heart skipped. I stood there staring at the closed door, telling myself it was just a draft, that maybe the old hinges gave out. But the hallway was dead still. No wind, no air vents, nothing. Against my better judgment, I reached out and pushed the door open. The beam of my flashlight swept across the room, and my stomach turned. Every single desk had been turned around, not 1 or 2, all of them. Instead of facing the chalkboard at the front of the room, they were lined up neatly, perfectly, facing the back wall. Rows and rows of empty desks pointing at nothing. The sight made my skin crawl. It was too deliberate, too intentional. I backed out slowly, keeping the light on the desks as long as I could, and moved on to the next room. My hand shook as I pushed the next door open. Same thing. Every desk turned to face the back wall. By the third room, I was sweating cold. It wasn't just that the desks were turned. It was the feeling behind it. Like they'd been forced. Like whoever, or whatever, had done it, wanted the students to look away from the front, to look at nothing. I forced myself to keep going, room after room, each one worse than the last. Some had papers scattered across the turned desks, old worksheets curled in yellow. One had a stack of books toppled on the floor, spines cracked and covers coated in dust. And every time, the desks faced the wrong way, as if the entire class had turned its back on the teacher in unison. My chest tightened with panic. I needed to get out. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, relief washed over me until I looked up. The double doors I had come through were closed tight. I knew I hadn't shut them. I never would have. My stomach dropped as I walked toward them, keys rattling in my shaking hand. The air felt colder now, pressing in against my skin. My footsteps echoed so loud they sounded like someone else was following right behind me. I reached the doors and fumbled with the lock. My hands were slick with sweat, keys slipping through my fingers. Every second felt like something was standing just inches away, breathing down my neck. Finally, the key turned. I yanked the door open, stepped out into the main hallway, and without even thinking, I slammed it shut behind me. My breathing was ragged, my chest heaving. I grabbed the heavy chain and lock from the wall and secured the doors tight. When my supervisor asked why I hadn't finished the inspection, I told him flat out. The wing was unsafe and shouldn't be entered. He raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. Maybe he saw the look on my face. Maybe he already knew. To this day, those classrooms are still locked up, covered in dust, untouched. But every now and then when I walk past that hallway, I swear I feel cold air seeping out through the cracks. And I can't help but picture those rows of desks turned away from the front, waiting for something none of us were meant to see.